Hey everyone, welcome back for some more Standard here on MTG Arena. And I have to say, I am really excited to showcase what I have for you today. This is mono green. And my last video was a mono black deck, and I said that black was my favorite color in Magic, and that's true, it is. However, green is probably my second favorite color. The first Standard deck I ever made was a mono green deck. And this goes way back to actually the Zendikar block. And I had cards, I of course had Llanowar Elves in there, but also Arbor Elf. And I had cards like Leatherback Baloth, Rampaging Baloth, Wolfbriar Elemental, Avenger of Zendikar, and I think Colony Hydra, if I'm not mistaken. And then of course, Overrun. However, once the 2011 core set came out, then Overrun was replaced with Overwhelming Stampede. And Overwhelming Stampede is an insane card. That card is just absolutely nuts. So I feel like I'm going a little bit back to my roots here with this deck. And really, there have been many stages in the years that I've played Magic where I've had a mono green deck. I just haven't showcased one recently, right? In this kind of more recent Standard that we've been in until now. And ironically, on my last video, a user by the name of Jeff Painter actually left a comment saying that I'm hoping you'll do something with mono green. I literally read that comment as I was recording the commentary for this video. It was meant to be. You know, it's meant to be that my next video was a mono green deck. So here it is. So this build that you see in front of you is actually not completely original. It's not something that I came up with entirely on my own. It's actually based on a build that was put together by MYTHIC Mike. MYTHIC Mike is one of my favorite MTG content creators to watch. He pretty much exclusively plays best of one, and I obviously play best of three. And if most of you watching are into best of three, then maybe you're not as into best of one comment. But truthfully, MYTHIC Mike is just one of the best out there. He's really entertaining. He's got some of the best aggro decks you will ever see. I really highly recommend you check out his channel, and I will leave a link to his mono green video in the description of this video. So I used his build as a base, but then tried to change it for best of one to make it fit better in this format, right? And there's actually a lot of different things that I tried. What you're seeing in front of you is kind of the final build that I came up with, but I'm actually going to show you another build towards the end of this deck tech. And I'm going to show you matches from both. Let me start talking about the cards, and I'm not going to do my usual thing where I just go in order. I'm going right to this guy. This card is so busted. It is absolutely busted. This is the best card in Avatar, hands down, full stop, without question. And I have to say, as excited as I am to be playing this card and how much fun it is and all this stuff, this is a mistake. And I'm sorry to be starting the video out this way, but look, we've been here before. This entire year, Corey Steelcutter, VV, now the Badgermole Cub. There's no way around these ridiculously strong cards that they keep printing. So I'm sorry to start off with something a little bit negative there, but it's just the truth. I have to say it. Printing this card, printing Badgermole Cub was a mistake. But that being said, this is the card. This is the card that makes this, just shoots this deck right over the top and makes green one of the best colors in Standard right now. And it's also the reason why there are so many creatures in here that make extra mana. Now, a more familiar name for these are mana dorks. I personally don't like to use that name, so I just call them mana creatures, right? You can also say like mana producing creatures, whatever, but I'd say mana creatures. But that's why there's so many of these in here, because now every time you tap one of those, you tap for an extra green. Obviously, the land that you earthbend is also going to tap for an extra green because that's a creature now. You know, there have been so many videos out there about the Badgermole Cub. I don't think there's anything that I can say that other people haven't said, right? What instead I'm going to do is just talk about how this build is a little bit different from others and what it actually aims to do. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious here, but ideally you want to start with one of these other mana creatures, right? Either Gene Pollinator or Llanowar Elves, then you can turn to Badgermole Cub, and then you can just start popping off with your other mana producing creatures, right? Tender Wild Guide, Leyline Weaver. I forget what this is in the paper set, but this card is really important. I'm going to come back to this card in a little bit. You know, for one thing, 2/2 with reach is pretty nice, right? In addition to being able to tap for either red or green, but there's something else here that I'm going to come back to. Then there's also Bramble Familiar. This is another 2/2 that taps for mana, but that Fetch Quest adventure spell is also really important. I'm going to come back to that one as well. The idea here is to just ramp up into one of your win conditions, ideally Craterhoof Behemoth. The Badgermole Cub makes it pretty freaking easy to cast this card. And especially if you're offspringing your Tender Wild Guide, right? If you offspring your Tender Wild, and look, sometimes you don't even need the Cub to do this. Sometimes just the Gene Pollinator, the Llanowar Elves, the Wild Guide, Offspring, right? The Weaver, this is just enough with your lands to just hard cast Craterhoof Behemoth. If not Craterhoof, then of course there's Ouroboroid. This is just another busted card that came in Edge of Eternities, right? Green is just getting these busted cards, man. I mean, Ouroboroid needs no introduction. This card is insane. Then there's also Tyvar in here. And you notice a theme here with these creatures, right? It's that they buff your other creatures. Tyvar does that with this 5-mana ability, which, by the way, isn't that hard to do. And you might even be able to do it on the turn that he lands because you might have 8 mana available. You can tap 3 just to play him and then tap another 5 to buff for your whole board, right? So these 3 guys right here are win conditions because they're going to buff your entire board that is hopefully kind of wide between Offspring, the Paw Patch Recruit, Offspring, the Tender Wild Guide, Earthbending with Badgermole Cub, right, to make another creature. So hopefully your board is really wide, and then you can just buff all your creatures with one of these other big creatures, and then that's how you win the game. However, in addition to tapping for mana, the Fetch Quest adventure spell here is another potential win condition. You mill 7 cards and then put a creature, enchantment, or land from the cards onto the battlefield. So hopefully you mill an Ouroboroid or a Craterhoof, or in the worst case, a Tyvar, and then that's another way that you can find these big creatures to buff your entire board. I mean, look, if you mill a Craterhoof and then you put it onto that might win the game, right? Usually when Craterhoof lands, you want to play Craterhoof when you're going to win the game that turn. So this Bramble Familiar is not only a mana producing creature, it can serve that purpose, but this is also part of the win conditions, right? Because it might find you one of these big creatures here that can win you the game. Additionally, when you cast Craterhoof Behemoth or Ouroboroid or the Fetch Quest, you're going to untap the Leyline Weaver. See, the Leyline Weaver untaps when you cast a spell with mana value 4 or greater. This is insane. This is so freaking good. And this is what Mythic Mike was talking about in his video as well. If you have a Badgermole Cub and you have one of these, tap it for 2 mana. If you have 2 of them, tap it for 4 mana in total, right? But then they untap. They untap when you play an Ouroboroid. They untap when you play Craterhoof Behemoth. So now you can attack with them. That's just crazy, you know, to play an Ouroboroid and untap with this and then attack with it after you just tapped it for mana. Same thing with the Craterhoof. Everything gets what? +6, +6, +7, +7. And now you get to attack with this thing and it's got trample. It's a 10/10 and it's got, and you just use it. This is just nuts. It's insane. There's also another alternate win condition here. It's not really a win condition, but it can help you get there in the form of Vivian. So Vivian could potentially find you one of these big creatures, just like the Fetch Quest can, right? You get to look at the top 4 creatures. There's also a little bit of flexibility here with being able to remove something, but also, even if you don't find something, in a few turns here, you can just do the -8 ability. That wins you the game. Most cases, if you have a board and you have multiple creatures, that -8 is not much different than playing one of these other big things, right? So Vivian is also another potential win condition. So if you look at this, there's a total of 12 potential win conditions. And then the rest of it is just mana ramping. There's a bunch of utility creatures here, right? The Keen-Eyed Curator, the Paw Patch Recruits, the Surak, right? The Paw Patch Recruit is really important because obviously it's really good against Dimir midrange. It's also good against other decks that can be a little bit interactive, like even Sultai Reanimator can be a little bit interactive between the Bitter Triumphs and the Awaken the Honored Deads and so on. But also the Offspring to go wide, which is what you want. You want to be going wide with this deck. You want to have a big board of creatures and then just swing for tons of damage. Very similar to the Overwhelming Stampede that I mentioned before, right? And the reason why, so you might argue, well, why not just run more copies of Tyvar, right? Why not just run a 4th copy of Craterhoof Behemoth? I was trying those things. And I was also trying it without the Bramble Familiar. You know, I was trying just kind of like with these guys. And the fact is that what I was finding is having all of your win conditions on the same mana cost is not good, because then you don't have flexibility. Like, what if you don't have 8 mana? What if you only have 7? Or what if you have 5 mana, right? And all this stuff. So having the flexibility, you notice this? See, let me organize these a little bit. So Tyvar is 3 mana, right? And then you need 5 mana to activate the ability, of course. Ouroboroid is 4 mana. Vivian is 5 mana. Bramble Familiar 7 mana, the fetch quest, and then the Craterhoof is 8 mana. You see what I'm doing here? I'm spreading out my win conditions across different mana costs. This has proven to be much better. You could argue, like, why run Keen-Eyed Curator at all? You know, you can just run more Tender Wild Guides. And yes, you absolutely can, but I don't think I need to explain too much as to why Keen-Eyed Curator is in this deck. This is best of 3. There's Sultai Reanimator as a deck. It's one of the most played decks, and there's other decks that use the graveyard too, right? There's Orzhov Aristocrats, there's Yuna, there's Insidious Roots, there's that Golgari combo thing with that also uses Craterhoof, and then there's the other Golgari thing that uses the Blood Gas, right? So graveyard hate is so important. So I've pulled back a little bit on the mana production here, right? Only 2 copies of the Bramble Familiar, only 2 copies of the Wild Guide. But honestly, it really hasn't been an issue. It's very rare that I don't have the amount of mana that I need to do the stuff that I want. Even if I'm holding a Craterhoof in my hand, it's fine. It's fine because I have these other things going on. Surak can draw me cards. All Patch Recruit can put ++1 counters on my creatures. You know, it's not like Craterhoof Behemoth is hit or miss, right? Then for additional utility, I did add 2 copies of Hard Hitting Question. What I found is that I had this on the sideboard for a while, and I was just putting it in so many games. For one thing, this is the answer to your opponent's Badgermole Cub. Every single deck that has green is running Badgermole Cub now. So it is so important to remove their Badgermole Cub. This is a way that you can do it. You know, the Cub is only a 2/2. It can easily die to like a bunch of these creatures, right? And I want the hard-hitting question because I don't want to fight, because what if my Badgermole Cub or what if my Tender Wild Guide, I don't want to trade with that creature. And I don't need the added flexibility of a Bushwhack to go find a basic land. I have so much mana available. And for that reason, I'm only running 20 lands and only 1 Soulstone Sanctuary, because bottom line is you need green. You need green. Green is so important. Just green, green, green. And that extra Soulstone, it wasn't really doing anything, right? So I do have 1 in here just on the off, like it's 1 more creature that could potentially attack, right? But only 1 Soulstone, and then another new card from Avatar, which is Ba Sing Se. This card fits really nicely in this deck. You do need to be a little bit careful though. You don't want your lands coming in tapped. So I'm only running 1 because I want to make sure that I have a forest in play before this gets to the field. But you could run potentially more than that. You could run like maybe 2 or 3. But this is good. You get to Earthbend one of your lands. And if you don't have anything to do, like if you top decked another land, you're getting a little bit flooded, or you just top decked a Land of Werewolves and you're waiting for one of your big heavy hitters, you can just animate some of your lands, right? That's another way that you can keep building out your board, and there's not really a risk, right? They just come back unless your opponent ultimates you, right? That's pretty much the only answer to Earthbend. So that is how the deck works. It is just go wide, mana ramp, the most insane mana ramp that I've ever seen, honestly. Certainly in Standard. You know, there's other formats where the mana ramp is even crazier, but in Standard, this is unbelievable. Let me talk briefly about the sideboard, which has taken a bit of a while to sort out. Again, in different versions of the deck, the sideboard has looked different than it does now. 3 copies of Dragon Sniper. This card is very important. There are a lot of creature decks, especially big creature decks like other mono green or Simic aggro or whatever. There's also a Simic ramp deck that runs like Quantum Riddler and Meringue River Regent. So the sniper blocks all those flyers. It has Death Touch, it has Vigilance, it can attack. Any of those decks that are running big creatures and especially big flyers, you just put this card right into the main deck. You can take out the paw patches, right? And a nice 3/3 exchange. 2 copies of Heritage Reclamation. This is just a very flexible card. It's not really necessary in that many matchups, but I do like the flexibility that it offers. It is good against Sultai Reanimator because it can not only destroy and awaken the Honored Dead, it can also pull something out of the graveyard. But look, sometimes you have mono black that runs Unholy Annex or something like that, or you run into Boros tokens and they're running the War Leader's Call, right? Something like that. Trap Shooters here for more enchantment removal, but this is better against enchantment creatures than like non-creature enchantments. So I wouldn't necessarily be as I feel like it's better to run Heritage Reclamation against non-creature enchantments. You know, if it's like Authority of the Consuls or something like that, right? Granted, Authority of the Consuls is a big problem for this deck, so you might want to put the Scrap Shooter in as well, in addition to the Heritage Reclamations. But what I mean is that this works really well against enchantment creatures because now, not only did you remove an opponent's creature, you are now up a creature. See, if I play a Heritage Reclamation, I traded a creature for a non-creature spell, which is not necessarily bad, but that's not really the aggro way to do things. See, if I play a Scrap Shooter, Now I have traded an opponent's creature for one of my creatures. That's big upside, right? So Scrap Shooter tends to go in if my opponent's playing creature enchantments like Summon Fenrir's or something like that. It's also just a really excellent blocker against Dimir Midrange. I'll typically sideboard this in against Dimir Midrange because it's a 4/4 with reach. Like, none of those flyers can get past this, right? And then your opponent has to waste a removal spell on it. Then I have an assortment of protection spells here. So Royal Treatment, Smuggler's Surprise, and Snakeskin Veil. The Royal Treatment and Snakeskin Veil work really well against decks that have a lot of removal or a lot of interaction, like Dimir Midrange or Mono Black or something like that. The Smuggler's Surprise is more for control decks that play board waves, because this will give your creatures indestructible, at least all the big ones, right? It's possible that you won't have that many creatures that are like that, but look, if you just have an Ouroboroid on the field for like 2 turns, that's enough to buff your entire board higher than a power of 4, right? And it does save your Serac. It's pretty much just the most efficient way, right, to protect your creatures against Day of Judgment. So 3 copies of Frenzied Baloth. These also go in against control decks. I will admit that it can get a little bit difficult to find the room for all this stuff against control decks, and I think maybe only 2 copies of Frenzied Baloth is necessary. You could make room for something else, but I just wasn't really sure what else to put in. You know, like, what else is really necessary here for green to sideboard in? You know, green's not necessarily really interactive or anything like that. So I just wasn't sure what else could go here. And the Baloth is just really good against control decks, right? It can't be countered. It prevents your other creature spells from being countered. It has haste. It has trample, so it can get over those 1/1 fish tokens, right? And then 2 copies of Scavenging Ooze. So you might be asking, so obviously this is for graveyard decks, right? Well, you might be asking, why Scavenging Ooze as opposed to 2 more copies of Keen-Eyed Curator? I think that Keen-Eyed Curator is better in the main deck, because if you're not worried about the graveyard, this is just a 3/3 body, right? With 3/3 body is pretty good. Now, if you happen to exile 4 more card types with it, then it's a 7/7 with trample, which is outstanding. But the main thing is a 3/3 body. Scavenging Ooze is only a 2/2 body, but the reason why I have this in the sideboard instead of more copies of Keen-Eyed Curator is that I feel like it's unlikely to become a 7/7. I always feel like my opponent deals with it before that happens, or there's just not enough card types in there. Even against the graveyard deck, sometimes there's just not enough types in there to be able to get it to the 7/7. So having the ooze that gets bigger every single time it exiles something and gains you a life, that to me is better value against decks that are, if you need graveyard hate for a matchup, I do feel like the ooze is better value because it gets bigger every single time. It can go even past 7/7. Now, it doesn't have trample, right? But still, it gets bigger every single time you do it, and it gains you life every single time you do it. So that is this version of the deck. Again, I was trying to tune this well for best of 3. That's why I have copies of Serac in here. That's why I have multiple win conditions at different mana costs. And that's also why I'm main decking the Keen-Eyed Curators. This is what the other version looks like. It may be hard to spot what the differences are, so I'll just go through those. I was actually main decking copies of Frenzied Baloth, and then I had 2 more copies of the Baloth in the sideboard. My thinking behind this was, look, if I'm playing best of 3 standard, I don't know if I'm going up against a control deck. Am I going up against a reanimator deck, right? Or am I going up against a slow deck, a fast deck, whatever? So I wanted the flexibility of having these 2 creatures in here, the Baloth and the Keen-Eyed Curator. And then if I went up against a control deck, I would swap out the 2 copies of Keen-Eyed Curator, put in the 2 copies of Frenzied Baloth. If I went up against a reanimator deck, I would take out the 2 copies of Baloth, put in the 2 copies of ooze, right? That was my thinking here with between these 2 creatures, between the sideboard and the main deck. However, what I found is that it just wasn't really that necessary, right? It wasn't really that necessary to main deck Frenzied Baloth. For one thing, there are so many creature decks that are being played, and despite Baloth being a really good card, it just can't get through some of these other defenses that these other creatures are playing because it only has 2 toughness. I actually think this creature might be more valuable as a 3-mana creature that's a 3/3 trample haste and it still has the same text. And then the copy of Vivian is in the sideboard instead of the main deck list, and there's only 1 copy of Bramble Familiar in here, and instead I have 2 protection spells. In a similar manner to the Baloth, I was finding that the protection spells, it wasn't really that necessary. You know, obviously they're in here to protect my creatures, but the standard meta is just not that interactive right now. And again, I was sideboarding in these hard-hitting questions so much. You know, this is when they were in a sideboard compared to the main board. I was putting these in so often. I was taking out the 2 protection spells and putting in the hard-hitting questions. And I was like, you know what? These probably just belong in the main deck. I keep sideboarding them in. There is another copy of Snakeskin Veil here for more protection. There's one less copy of Dragon Sniper, right? But the Vivian is here. The hard-hitting questions are here. So those are the main differences between this deck list and the other one. I personally think that the other one is the better version of the deck. It does feel like it's a bit more consistent. So I have 6 matches that I want to show you because honestly, these games are so quick. I either win or my opponent wins because I'm either not getting enough lands or I'm not getting one of my top end creatures, right? So these games are just ending so quickly. So I decided I'm just going to put more matches in, you know, why not? Not all of the turns that I did with my deck are necessarily that interesting. You know, a lot of them I'm just like playing out my hand. But I will say that some of the decks that I went against were really interesting. So I'm glad that I can show that to you. Let's move on to the gameplay. I hope you all enjoy. All right, here's my opening hand for the first game of the first match. And this looks really good. I have a little bit of ramping with the Llanowar Elves. And then I have one of my win conditions in the form of Tyvar. And with my opponent starting with an Elegant Parlor, I actually thought this might be a control deck. It could be Jeskai control, but then with them playing an Aspiring Vantage, now it doesn't really seem like it, right? And then they play a Legion Extruder. So this is clearly some kind of artifact deck, and you know, certainly get rid of my Llanowar Elves is a good thing, right? So now I'm wondering what I should do, and the problem with playing Frenzy Baloth is that it just dies really easily to one of those tokens from weapons manufacturing. It's safe to assume that they're running weapons manufacturing in this deck, so I decided to run up the Curator instead. It also doesn't die to like Burst Lighting, Torch the Tower, right? Those things. At least they have to sacrifice, you know, they have to bargain the Torch the Tower to get rid of the Keen-Eye Curator. So Keen-Eye Curator is still on the field, and at this point, it does feel like maybe I can run out the Baloth because I can hit for 6, so I can kind of put my opponent on a bit of a clock here. And then after this, I'm thinking of just playing Tyvar and Paw Patch Recruit, Paw Patch without the Offspring. So just playing out my hand. Nothing from my opponent there, which was interesting. So they're certainly going to activate the Fountain Port if I attack, at least seemingly. They are activating the Fountain Port. There's their Fish token. They draw a card off of the Caretaker's Talent. And they're going to block my Curator. But they go down to 9, and I can play out my hand. That's what I'm thinking of doing here. So I'm going to play Tyvar, and then I'm going to run out the Paw Patch without the Offspring. And another thing with this is that I do have the 5th land in my hand. So next turn, I can just buff everything up with Tyvar, and then everything's going to get +3/+3. That should seemingly win me the game. Depends what my opponent has in their hand here. They have 6 cards. I wasn't too worried about the board wipe, but Pinnacle Star Cage is something to be a little bit concerned about, because if you make a whole bunch of munitions tokens with the weapons manufacturing, then you can remove them all and do tons of damage to your opponent, right? So my opponent could be running Pinnacle Star Cage. My opponent starts with the Carrot Cake. So now they get the 1/1 Rabbit. But the thing with this is that there actually is a combo here. So, and this is an interesting deck for my opponent, because they can activate the Legion Extruder, sack the Carrot Cake, they'll get another 1/1 Rabbit, but then they'll also get the 3/3 token, right? The 3/3 Construct token with the Legion Extruder. So that's actually a nice little combo there. And then obviously there's the Caretaker's Talent as well, right? So they'll draw a card off it. This is cool. You know, this is a nice little synergy here. See, this is what I'm checking with what my opponent has on the field. So this is a nice little combo here that my opponent's got. This is a really interesting deck, but I didn't quite do the math, but it really did seem like even with those 2 extra creatures coming down that I was still going to win the game, right? If anything, I'm going to put them to 1 life here. But I think with the trample, it's just going to be too much. So that's what's happening. So that's exactly what's happening. So that's exactly what happens. They have their 3 blockers, and then they'll declare their blockers, of course, and then I'll just activate Tyvar. And, you know, without the trample, they might not actually lose here, but with the trample, it certainly seems like it's going to be enough. So that's how you decide to block, and each creature gets +3/+3, and that's going to be the game. So my opponent's playing an interesting deck, though. This is actually more so why I wanted to show this match is, look, my mono green deck is going to do what it's going to do, right? I'm going to have my Tyvar, my white board, and I'm going to swing like I would. But my opponent's deck is pretty cool. So that being said, the Keen-Eyed Curator, it doesn't really do anything in this matchup, right? It seems a little bit better to bring in the enchantment and artifact hate, right? Even though Keen-Eyed Curator is a little bit, it's a slightly beefier body, right, than the like the Frenzied Baloth and some of the other things. It just felt like if I'm not getting the value from things in the graveyard, right, then it just might not be worth it. So I'm certainly going to put in the Heritage Reclamations and the Scrap Shooters. Those are really good options. And then I kind of wanted to just consider a couple other options here, like a Royal Treatment and then cutting a Surak. But honestly, it's not really necessary to do that. You could just leave the Surak in. I was just kind of thinking like, well, if I have a creature and they try to kill it with a Legion Extruder or whatever, then it gives me a little bit of tempo, right, to keep that creature up. But truthfully, in this matchup, I think it's not quite as relevant to, look, Vivian's another option too, right? Destroy artifact, enchantment, all these things. But the main thing with these aggressive decks is you don't want to sideboard too much. Maybe like two, three cards, maybe 4. In this case, it's seemingly 4, and then potentially this 5th one with the Royal Treatment, right? I'm kind of just testing the waters here. If you want to just do it super clean, I'd say just Heritage Reclamation, Scrap Shooter, that's all you need. Here's my opening hand for the second game, and this is exactly what you want with this deck. Turn 1 Llanowar Elves, turn 2 Badgermole Cub, and then I got a Surak to follow that up. Now, they start with an Authority of the Consoles. This is really good for them because it's going to turn off my Craterhoof Behemoth, essentially. Well, at least the Behemoth won't be able to attack because, it has haste, but my opponent starts with another Legion Extruder, so they're going to get rid of my Elves. And I'm tempted to not play the Badgermole Cub here because if I do and the Cub gets removed, then I didn't really get much value from it. Whereas if I can get it on the field with an Elves on the field already, then I get the extra mana from the Elves. So you want to try to play the Cub when you have the creature like Llanowar Elves, Gene Pollinator, right, on the field already, so that then you can buff the mana from that creature. Look at that, I drew another Cub, so this is just going to get kind of crazy, right? I can play this one Cub, Earthbend my land, and now I can decide if I want to play Surak or the other Cub. If I play the other Cub, then I can still play Surak, but at the same time, I'm just not sure if I want to show that much of my stuff. It feels a little bit better. Maybe I just save back this Cub. Again, they could be running Pinnacle Star Cage. I don't know about that yet, right? So I could have played out my hand, but I wanted to just play a little bit conservatively. So they're going to attack with the Rabbit, which certainly means that they're probably going to board wipe me. And that is what happened. So they did have Pinnacle Star Cage. So there you go. Me playing a little bit conservatively did pay off because I didn't lose my Badgermole Cub, my second one at least. I'm getting a little bit flooded here though. I drew the Soul Stone. Now I drew Ba Sing Se. So a little bit of flooding, but I can still play the Cub. And then I can put the Soul Stone down. I'm also debating not doing that. I am debating just playing the Soul Stone and then just animating it at the end of my opponent's turn. I decided to just run out this Cub. And what I realized is that I did make a slight mistake with this because the land gets haste, right? So I could have attacked with that land for 1 more damage. So slight little mistake there. Missed out on another point of damage. My opponent plays United Battlefront. This could be bad. We'll see what happens here. We'll see what they find. They found a Weapons Manufacturing and another Pinnacle Star Cage. So good for them, right? They get to wipe my board again, and then they get a Munitions token. But I top deck an Ouroboroid, so that's pretty sick. Unfortunately, I cannot play the Ouroboroid and activate the Soulstone Sanctuary. I'm thinking of just running out the Ouroboroid though. I can activate the Sanctuary on the next turn, and the Sanctuary will just get even bigger, right? It'll get 2 counters instead of just 1. And that's what I'm saying with this deck, man. It's like the threats just do not stop coming. And if you get rid of all the small stuff, all I need to do is just top deck one of my bigger things. And, you know, I have this Surak on the field if they're going to remove one of my guys and I'm going to draw a card. This deck just keeps coming. It just keeps coming and keeps coming. My opponent starts with a Legion Extruder. They're going to target my Ouroboroid, so seemingly they're going to have a way to remove it here. They can sack the munitions token with the Legion Extruder. That's what they're going to do. And they're going to get their 3/3 token off this. But I draw another card, and I drew the Royal Treatment. So after all that deliberation in the sideboard, that one Royal Treatment showed up, man. And now look at this. I got another. This Surak is so much value. I dug my way to find another Ouroboroid, and I found the one protection spell that I sideboarded in. All right, here's my opening hand for the first game of the second match. This is a little bit questionable. You know, I don't have a Badgermole Cub, and my first creature is just a Gene Pollinator, which by itself does not tap for mana. So I am considering mulliganing this. If that was a Llanowar Elves, this would be a possible keep. The thing is, I'm also on the draw, so I am wondering, would I potentially draw a land or, you know, draw... Well, I guess it would have to be a land or Llanowar Elves, but I decided not to take that risk, and look at this. I'm kind of rewarded, right? I got Elves and 2 Cubs in my hand now, so... Starting with Elves, of course. And with another forest coming down and their own Badgermole Cub, this is a mirror match, but I'm already ahead. Even though my opponent was on the play, I am ahead because I have 2 Cubs. So I get to Earthbend this land. I get to play my second Cub, Earthbend the other land, and now I can just basically run out my... I can cast the adventure side of the Bramble Familiar if I want to find a big creature potentially. I mean, this is just really in my favor. So they do cast an Ouroboroid though, so they got their win condition before I did. But I top deck a Tyvar. So Tyvar is potentially one of my win conditions, right? But Ouroboroid is a little bit stronger just because they're on the play and they got the trigger already, right? So they are a little bit ahead of me. So I do need to be a little bit careful here, right? Like, do I try to dig for something big with the Bramble Familiar? A Craterhoof Behemoth doesn't really do anything. If I find my own Ouroboroid, that could potentially be good. Or do I just run out this Tyvar, right? Because moreover, run out Tyvar and Surak. So it's a bit of a tough decision. Now, the thing is, the Ouroboroid on the next turn makes everything big. But if my opponent ever, like, taps out, I mean, that's not that good for them, right? If they tap out, because I can potentially come back with my own huge attack. And I have these Earthbended lands. I mean, they have 1 Earthbended land, but I have 2 Earthbended lands that I can potentially block with, right? So it seemed like just run out my hand, I go a little bit wide, and this kind of prevents them from being able to attack me. And they play a Scrap Shooter. So there's nothing to target with that, but it is a big body. And they play a Keen-Eyed Curator as well. So they're also going a little bit wide, and their stuff is getting big. It's going to be huge next turn. So I'm thinking I might just have to go for this Bramble Familiar, right? I might just have to go for the Adventure spell and see what I get if I don't top deck something really powerful right now. I'm also wondering if I should just play this Snakeskin Veil to buff the Surak, because then Surak will have 5 power and everything on in my side of the field will get +5/+5. So that was why I was pausing there at the end of my opponent's turn, because if I do that, then everything gets really big, you know, +5/+5, I might be able to attack and force them to do some blocks. You know, this is what I'm thinking here, right? How do I'm probably not going to win this game in the long run with the Ouroboroid. How can I threaten them enough right now to try and make them block? So I am still considering doing this because for 6 mana, I can buff the team with Tyvar and I can play the Snakeskin Veil on the Surak. So everything's going to get +5/+5. I'm honestly thinking of doing that because if I attack right now, my opponent's forced to block. And that might be to my favor, right? If I'm able to do that. So I want to leave one of the Earthbended lands because those come back onto the field, right? If my Llanowar Elf dies, it just dies. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to buff the whole team +5/+5. I have these big creatures. They have to block, right? They have to block 3 of my creatures right now. Not only that, but they don't have any good trades, right? The only good trade that they have is Scrap Shooter for my land. So this was the right thing to do. I'm not going to win this game in the long run. So it's better for me to just slam right now and force my opponent to block. So that's what my opponent is trying to do. They really want to get this Tyvar off the field, seemingly. But I'm going to take out their Ouroboroid with this. So that's what they decided. So I'm going to put them to 3 life, and I'm also going to clear out their entire board. So that was the right thing to do, was just attack. My opponent's going to play another Scrap Shooter. I have to say, since the Badgermole Cub, there have been a lot more mono green decks. It's much more popular now than it ever has been. I run into a lot of this deck in the on the arena ladder. So my opponent's going to remove the Serac, but now if I can find just one more, like if I get an Ouroboroid, anything, I'm just going to win the game, right? Unfortunately, I didn't, but if I attack here, I can still put my opponent to 1 life. So that is what I'm debating doing here. You know, I'm also debating, they only have 1 card in their hand. I'm debating just not attacking yet and just using all my mana to go really wide. Play the 2 Weavers, play the Familiar, and then next turn I might be able to get 3 damage through, right? So that's also what I'm thinking of doing, instead of activating the Adventure spell on the Bramble Familiar. So playing the Leyline Weaver, playing the other Leyline Weaver, and I'm going to hold back this Bramble Familiar just to... Because right now, as it is, they don't have enough to block, right? Even with the Soulstone Sanctuary, this would be lethal damage. They Offspring a Paw Patch Recruit, though. So this is enough blockers. And I top decked another Badgermole Cub. So I'm just going to... I want to be a little bit careful here, but it did seem better to just tap the 2 lands, because seemingly I could have made one of those lands into an untapped creature, right? I thought it was better to do it this way, though. Now I definitely have enough mana to activate the Bramble Familiar, the Adventure spell, and I can just tap 2 of my creatures. And see, the Leyline Weavers are going to untap, so that's why I tap them. These creatures are so good in this deck because they untap when you play a big thing, and look at all that stuff. They just... I'm going to slam that Ouroboroid, and this is absolutely going to be enough to close out this game. So those Leyline Weavers are just so good in this deck. I did get a little bit lucky, though. You know, I had 3 Badgermole Cubs, and not only that, I had 2 in my opening hand, right? I got the Tyvar early on as well, but that was the right decision to attack on my opponent's turn there. So against this deck, against these big creature decks, the Frenzy Baloth is not going to do anything. It's not going to be able to get through for damage, really. The hard-hitting Question is definitely good because it is a little bit risky because their creatures can get big, my creatures can get big, right? But look, I mean, if I just remove one of their smaller creatures, that might be enough to punch through damage, and I can just ignore one of their creatures that's a little bit bigger. I also do want to put in a Dragon Sniper here, and really, seemingly, it would be better to have them both. And the Paw Patch Recruit, it does have trample, right? But they're not going to be like targeting my guys, so I'm not going to get the triggered ability that often. So that Paw Patch would just be to go wide and get some trample, but that's not as relevant in this matchup. You know, it is pretty much against these aggressive creature decks, whether it be Simic or Mono Green, whatever. You're going to want to put those Dragon Snipers in. You know, that's why they're in the sideboard. Here's my opening hand for the second game. And this is not that great, actually, even though I have a Badgermole Cub. I did decide to keep it since the Cub basically is, you know, it's one of the best cards in this deck. In fact, it's arguably the best card in the deck. And I have a Craterhoof, you know, I have one of my win conditions here, but I don't have a first turn play. So I did debate mulliganing this, but I didn't want to give up the Cub. And my opponent has missed a land drop, so I got a little bit lucky. And drawing a Tender Wild Guide is actually really good. So I can potentially Offspring that. My opponent's going to attack. I'm certainly not going to block. and they play a Hemosimic Might, and that's it. No attacks from my opponent. So the Might can be a problem if they have a pump spell. So I do just need to be wary, right? I might take a hit on this next turn. But I'm certainly going to go wide with the Wild Guy because I can play Craterhoof, right? And I'm going to get in with this Cub because they're not going to block with the Might, right? I'm not going to block with the Cub. That's my most important creature. So there's the Giant Growth, like I was thinking. Now I have to decide if I'm going to block or not. As it is on the field, I have 8 mana, right? There's 2 from each Tender Wild Guide, and then there's 2 from the Earthbended Forest, and then 2 forests. So that's 8 mana. So I'd have to tap all my creatures to play this Craterhoof. If I play Craterhoof, everything gets +5/+5. But only the Badgermole and the Craterhoof can attack. So the Craterhoof would be a 10/10, and the Badgermole would be a 7/7. So that's 17. So that's not enough to kill them on the next turn. So because it wasn't enough to kill them on my next turn, I did want to block with this Tender Wild Guide token. It means I might have to wait to play this Craterhoof, but I can't finish them on my next turn. And if I go down to only 4 life, right, another pump spell, that might just do me in. So seemingly my next turn, I would just play the Surak, and then I would just hold up the 2 instant spells, right? Snakes can Veil and Royal Treatment, which can be used as combat tricks. But I top decked the Llanowar Elves. So this will replace the Tender Wild Guide token that I lost. I can play this, and I can play Surak, and then I can hold up the 2 instant spells. And then maybe after that, you know, my board is wide enough that I can finish them with Craterhoof Behemoth. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to play my Elf and play the Surak. I'm going to hold back the Earthbend land because if I need to block with it, it just comes back, right? This is a very interesting dynamic from the last game, where the last game I had to get on the offense where I had to be aggressive, but then this game I have to play more defensively. So my opponent does attack, which I was a little bit surprised about. I'm thinking I can just block with this Surak and then use one of the combat tricks. And I actually might use both combat tricks here if I want to save my Earthbended Forest, right? So I'm going to declare these blocks first and see what my opponent does. They play a Royal Treatment on the Hemosimic Might. So now I'm wondering, is it better to just buff up the Forest all the way and give up the Surak? It feels like yes, because that's 2 mana right there, right? So it's a little bit weird, but I'm just going to let Surak die, and I'm just going to buff up my Forest, and then they conceded the game. Now, the game wasn't actually over at that point, right? I could play the Craterhoof and attack them for 17, so it would be at 1 life. But interesting dynamic in the mirror match, right? Having to be aggressive in game 1, but then having to be more defensive in game 2. All right, here's my opening hand for the first game of the 3rd match. It's not that great. I have a win condition in the form of Craterhoof Behemoth, but I don't really have much going on otherwise, right? I can play the Gene Pollinator. I can play the King-Eye Curator. I might be able to protect something right with Royal Treatment, but this hand isn't that great, but it's not bad enough for me to mulligan. So I drew a Llanowar Elves, so I'm going to play that first. And my opponent is a Selesnya deck, at least seemingly, right? So now I'm going to Offspring this Paw Patch. It's the most mana efficient thing that I can do. They play a Summon Fenrir. And they get a Mountain. So this is a Naya combination now. And I can just keep widening my board. You know, I don't really need to attack here necessarily. And I wasn't that worried about a board wipe either. You know, if this is Naya, I thought this might be Naya Yuna because, you know, the Naya colors do run Summon Fenrir in the Yuna decks. So I thought it could be that. So I wanted to hold up a Royal Treatment in case of an Overlord of the Boiler Bilges, and then I can protect my creature, right? Like an Impended Overlord, I mean. This is another little trick that I'm going to do. I'm going to tap the Elves to play the Gene Pollinator, and now I have a basic force to hold up a Royal Treatment. So if my Elf got removed, right, then I could still cast Royal Treatment. So that's why I decided to do that. Because, like, what if they target my elf with something and I don't want to save the royal treatment to just protect my elf? If they target something else, right, or I need to use a combat trick or whatever. So tapping down your mana creatures on your turn is sometimes the better thing to do if you need to hold something up on your opponent's turn, because the basic land is going to be fine, right? It's not going to go anywhere, whereas your creature could. So I'm going to do it again. I'm going to play the Gene Pollinator, and then I am going to play Surak here, but I'm going to use the other Gene Pollinator to tap that Gene Pollinator, right, to make a green, and then I'm going to play Surak, and then I'm going to save the basic forest for royal treatment. And this also prevents them from drawing a card off of the Summon Fenrir. My opponent plays a Genesis Wave. That's pretty cool. Don't see that card played that often. But they didn't really hit too much. They hit an Overlord of the Hauntwoods. They could play that. They also hit a Summon Fenrir. And they decided to bin the Overlord of the Hauntwoods and play the Summon Fenrir instead. And they went to go get an island. So this is a 4-color deck. Pretty interesting. Some kind of 4-color ramp deck. And there's nothing really that scary in the graveyard, so I am going to just at least activate this King-Eye Curator to get rid of the Overlord, just in case they do run Yuna. And look at that, I found a Badgermole Cub. So now, with the Badgermole Cub, look at what I'm doing. I'm going through my mana. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? I have 6 just off the creatures. But if I Earthbend one of the lands, because I only have to tap 2 lands, so one of the lands is going to be untapped. So I'm going to have 8 mana. I can cast the Craterhoof. And then I'm just checking to see if I'll still have enough creatures to attack. And it certainly seems like it. For one thing, everything's going to get, what, +9, or whatever. So I'm going to animate this land. And now I'm going to use one of the Gene Pollinators to tap the Cub, because the Cub just entered. It's not going to be able to attack. Then I can tap the Forest, tap the Elves, tap the other Gene Pollinator, of course, and I'll just select the 1/1 creature. Tap the Forest, tap the Elves, play the Craterhoof. Everything's going to get +10/+10. And then swing. It's insane. This deck is insane. It's absolutely insane. So I'm still not sure exactly what my opponent is doing here. I'm still wondering if it is a unit deck, because those decks do run Summon Fenrir. But now I'm not too sure. It could also just be some ramp deck. Like maybe they have Ireni, right, the Spirit Dragon in there. Or just some other big spells that they can play and they're just trying to ramp into. So I wasn't really too sure of what to do. On the off chance that they are running Yuna, I decided to put in the 2 copies of Scavenging Ooze and take out the Frenzied Baloth. But I really wasn't too sure. You know, I didn't see that much of their deck. I'm wondering if I should keep in these protection spells. You know, again, if they have Overlord, the Boiler Bilges, then I would certainly potentially want them, right, to protect one of my creatures. It seemed better, though, to just take them out and put in the 2 copies of Scrap Shooter. If they get an enchantment on there, you know, for one thing, if one of their enchantments is a creature like Summon Fenrir or the Overlord of the Hauntwoods, right, then I can just remove that creature with Scrap Shooter. So this felt like the best I could do with the information that I have, right? We'll see what happens in the next game. Here's my opening hand for the second game. I only have 1 land, but this really isn't too bad. You know, I can start with the Llanowar Elves, and then I have a Tender Wild Guide, and then I have an Ouroboroid. And I drew a second land anyway, so it just got much better, right? And they start with their own elves. So we'll see what happens with this. They start with the Summon Fenrir. So they do have access to quite a lot of mana right now. Of course, I will as well. And I drew Badgermole Cub. This card is just insane, y'all. This card is busted. And this card is really a problem. But now I'm wondering, you know, what do I do? Do I play the Cub? I'm certainly going to play the Cub, but do I play the Wild Guy, right? Do I play the Ooze? I obviously want to be mana efficient here, so it seems like I should probably play either the Wild Guide or the Ooze, and I'm thinking of just playing the Wild Guide. But again, if it's Yuna, right, if it's a Yuna deck, I might want that Ooze on the field. I'm still not sure, so I'm going to play the Cub, animate my land, and then I'm going to play the Wild Guide. Now I just have tons of mana. I I have 7 mana. My opponent plays another Summon Fenrir. So this is going to be a 4/3, right? Because it's a +1/+1 counter from the other one. And again, my opponent is 4 colors here. I drew another Tender Wild Guide off the top. So I'm thinking of just being a mana efficient here. Right, just play the Scrap Shooter, play the Ouroboroid. And I am also thinking of gifting my opponent a card just so I can get rid of the Summon Fenrir that just came on the battlefield. It's going to go away anyway, right, in 2 turns. But it does accelerate me a little bit by getting rid of one of the creatures. So they do get a card, but it seems like it might be worth the payoff doing that because I'm going to buff all my stuff, right? And getting rid of one of the creatures, it might be worth it because then I can potentially get him for damage a little bit sooner. So that's what I'm thinking of doing. I'm going to play the Scrap Shooter. Gift them a card. And get rid of the bigger Summon Fenrir that just came in. The other one will go away on their next turn, of course. And then play the Ouroboroid. And I unfortunately can't attack. You know, I don't want to lose my Cub, but still got a nice board here. And watch what happens here. Watch what my opponent plays. It's not something you would expect. Dragonback Assault. How about that? Now it makes sense, right? Now it makes sense why they had so much ramp in their deck. They're playing Landfall with Dragonback Assault, right? So look, there was no way I could really figure that out, right? With my opponent, with the first game, there was no inclination that that's what my opponent was really doing. Not Dragonback Assault. It could be any other ramp thing, but unexpected. I could have played around it if I knew about it, but I didn't. But honestly, it doesn't really matter. You know, now I get to Offspring this Paw Patch. If they have another Dragonback Assault, so be it. And if they don't, then my board just gets absolutely huge, right? I mean, this is just, look at this. I'm slamming for 11 damage here. It doesn't even matter. It doesn't even matter that they played a Dragonback Assault. I mean, we have to see what happens. You know, if they play another one and they get a bunch of dragons on the field, right? That could potentially be a problem. But so they're going to start with a Bloomvine region. I actually think it would have been better for them to just play that because they could gain the life. But maybe they didn't have another land in their hand and they wouldn't be able to make another dragon and then gain even more life, right? Because otherwise you gain 6 life off of the regent there. You gain 3 life when it enters and then 3 life when the next dragon enters. So they're going wide here with Llanowar Elves, a couple more dragons, and they just concede. So this deck is just crazy, man. It really is. Badgermole Cub is insane. It's just an insane card. All right, here's my opening hand for the first game of the 4th match. This does look keepable. I have a Elves, and then I can Keen-Eyed Curator or play the Badgermole Familiar. It is a little bit of a risky keep, though, because if my opponent gets rid of my Elves, I'm kind of stuck, right? And thankfully, I'm on the play. Helps my chances a little bit, although it would have been nice to also get that extra card, right? But Gloomlake Word, Spyglass Song, we know what this is, right? It's obviously Dimir Midrange, so going to be interesting to see how my mono green deck here can go up against one of my favorite decks, and I unfortunately did not get a second land, so I'm off to just a bit of a slow start. And they play a Deep Cavern Bat. Now, it actually doesn't really matter, right, what they take here. The best option for them might be the Paw Patch Recruit to take. Taking a Surak doesn't matter. I have another one, right, and taking the Craterhoof. I mean, I'm far away from that so far, right? So they did the right thing, taking the Paw Patch. I did hit another land, so I can tap my Elf and tap my 2 lands, and then I can attack with the Familiar. But unfortunately, I don't have an answer for Kaito here if my opponent plays Kaito. No Kaito, since my opponent is tapping or activating the map token. But they had a land there anyway, so I guess they just don't have a Kaito in their hand, right? See, because they played the Verge, they had the 3rd land, so they obviously don't have a Kaito. They would have probably just ninjutsu'd him. Actually, maybe in that case, ninjutsuing Kaito is not such a good idea. I would have been able to kill him on my if they stun, right? If they stun, then I can kill him, and even if they hold back blockers, I can still kill him. So maybe that's why. So now, seemingly my opponent is holding something here, and it could be Floodpitch Drowner, right? So I'm really debating what to do here, because if it's removal, I would rather only attack with the Surak, because then I can replace the Surak and play Keen-Eyed Curator. However, if it's a Floodpitch Drowner, then I'd rather attack with everything. Because if it's just Floodpitch Drowner, they could tap down one of my mana creatures, right? And then I won't be able to use them. So I'm really debating what to do here. It feels like if I attack with all 3 of my creatures, then they can play removal, and then I can only play a Surak, which is not that good. It would be better for me to play Surak and Keen-Eyed Curator. However, if it's just Floodpitch Drowner, then I won't be able to replace the Surak until my next turn if they shuffle it away. So I'm in a bit of a weird spot right now. Also, if it's Floodpitch Drowner, they can tap down my Surak and they can block the Bramble Familiar or the Elves. So this feels like a bit of a risk, just attacking with Alter. I'm just trying to get in for damage though, obviously. And they did. They let me get in for damage. So now I'm going to play the Keen-Eyed Curator. That was essentially why I decided to do the attack. And look at this, it's nowhere to run. You see how smart my opponent was there? You see how smart that was? They waited until the end of my turn to play the nowhere to run because I couldn't replace the Surak then. And they also didn't remove my stuff during combat, even though they took the damage, because I wouldn't be able to replace my Surak. That was so smart from my opponent. That was such a smart play. So even though they took some extra damage there, and I do think it was probably worth it for me to just get in for the damage as the more aggressive player. Now they're going to play a Floodpitch Drowner before I can get my Surak on. This is, look at how good my opponent is doing. This is just awesome. Tapping down my Keen-Eyed Curator, playing another Floodpitch Drowner, tapping down my Familiar. This is just excellent. Now I can't play my Craterhoof, right? This is so freaking good. They can shuffle away these 2 creatures if they want. Now, if they shuffle away, though, then I'm going to draw some cards. But still, this is just excellent play from my opponent. They're going to Bitter Triumph my Surak. Now they can shuffle away one of these creatures, but then they give me a Badgermole Cub. This card is ridiculous. It is so freaking ridiculous. So my opponent's going to attack with everything. I did debate actually blocking here with the Llanowar Elves, but it seemed, you know, why bother, you know? Save my elves with me having the Badgermole Cub in my hand, right? But look at how good my opponent is playing here. Now I can potentially get this. I'm getting close to getting this Keen-Eyed Curator as a 7/7, right? Because they have a land in hand. I mean, a land in their graveyard. So this is 3 creature types, and if I just get sorcery or enchantment, whatever. And Keen-Eyed Curator is also an excellent counter to Enduring Curiosity, because when it dies, if you hold up the mana right, you can exile it before it comes back to the battlefield. So, but look at this massive board I have. I mean, if my opponent doesn't kill me on my next turn, I'm going to kill them on my next turn. So they have to kill me here, right? They can activate the Reef, right? But I can just block with this Forest, and it'll just come back. That's what I'm thinking of doing and saving my other creatures. But this Craterhoof's coming down, and it's going to win me the game. So this deck is just insane, y'all. It's a lot of fun, I will say. It's so much fun, but this is ridiculous. And seriously, though, I commend my opponent a lot. My opponent played this extremely well. Now it just depends on what that one card in their hand is. You know, can they survive? So we're going to combat. My opponent swings with everything. So I'm not going to block. Why would I block? And that's it. They didn't have anything. So I do commend my opponent a lot. They played that really well. So against Dimir midrange, it definitely feels like I should put in the protection spells, right? That's a big reason why they are in here. And the Keen-Eyed Curators, you know, they don't really do much against Dimir midrange. They're at least a bigger body to potentially block and attack, but there's no graveyard synergy here or anything, right? So I'm not getting the full value from them. So instead, putting into 2 protection spells, that's definitely going to provide some value. And then because their creatures are kind of small, it's not as necessary for me to buff my entire board, you know, to like win the game. I mean, seemingly, yes, that would be great to do. But what I'm saying is that this Tyvar is not necessarily as important as the Scrap Shooter. I might not even do the gift with the Scrap Shooter. This is just a 4/4 body that is hard for them to remove that can block their flyers, right? Block the Deep Cavern Bat, block the Spyglass Siren. So this honestly feels like the only thing that I really need. I mean, the Dragon Snipers are seemingly good as well because they do have the reach, but they just trade. And trading against Dimir midrange when they run a lot of creatures, it's not, you know, the snipers are more in there for blocking really big creatures, right? Not being wasted by just blocking a really small creature. Here's my opening hand for the second game. This is almost really good, but I don't have a 1-drop. And if they just play Floodpitch Drowner on my mana creature, right, that's no good. This hand is also a little bit slow. That might not be good either if they Kaido me and all this stuff. So this feels like I do need to mulligan. This opening hand is really not that much better, but I at least have a Paw Patch Recruit. That's pretty much the one difference here, is that I do have one drop. And it is also Paw Patch, right, which penalizes them for at least targeting my creature. So at least it's something. My opponent plays an Intimidation Tactics. So the best thing for them to take away would be the Leyline Weaver, because that's my mana creature, right? But they take the Surak instead. I think that was a slight mistake. The Weaver can also block the Spyglass Siren if it doesn't get buffed. They're going to stab my Paw Patch. And I drew another Surak off the top, so that was a little bit lucky, right? Because I can play that next turn. My opponent's going to activate the map token. And they do get the buff. They're going to leave that Curiosity on top, and then they're going to Tragic Trajectory my Weaver. So they've got a good start here, and I miss the land. There's nothing I can do. Here comes the Curiosity. And still didn't get a land, although that hard-hitting question might become relevant later. We'll see what happens. My opponent draws 2 cards. And they're just going to hold their spells. Now, I drew a Familiar. If this survives, then I can, you know, use it. But there's Floodpitch Drowner, so that's the game, right? Unfortunately, a very quick game there, right? Not much I could do either. I think I just played it the best I could. And there's no point in really changing my sideboard because there's not really anything else in my sideboard that can increase my chances in this matchup other than what I've already done. Here's my opening hand for the third game, and this is not great, but it's not bad. Start with Paw Patch, play Tender Wild Guide, and then I can play Ouroboroid if they don't remove my Wild Guide. They start with a Cecil. And look at that, Badgermole Cub showing up. Although I am wondering if it's better to not play this right now, because I don't want them to remove my Cub. So it seems better to just play the Wild Guide, right? And then I can play Ouroboroid. I can save the Cub. My opponent attacks with Cecil. And my opponent plays a Heartless Act on my Tender Wild Guide. I gotta say, it's a big mistake to run that card. It's a huge mistake to run that card against green. So I would highly advise not to do that. Look, my Paw Patch has a ++1 counter on it. If they target one of my other if they target a creature, I can put a ++1 counter with Paw Patch. The Ouroboroid puts ++1 counters, right? They also don't know that I don't have Innkeeper's Talent if you go up against a green deck that has Innkeeper's Talent. Like, and the Forest has +1. Don't play Heartless Act against green. Not against Simic, not against green. Because it's too likely that there's going to be ++1 counters, right? So my opponent is going to put the ++1 counter on Cecil and leave that 0-point ballot on top, and then they're going to shock their land in. So Cecil's going to flip. This is actually potentially an issue for me. So Cecil flips. I did draw a Surak, but I'm debating just running out this Ouroboroid instead. And unfortunately, I can't block this Cecil without losing one of my key creatures, so they're just going to gain 5 life off this, right? They do have another land, so they can actually wipe my board, right, with a 0-point ballad, which they're going to do. I get my land back at least, but no blocks for me. So now I just have an Ouroboroid and a Dream, right? I just drew a land off the top, unfortunately. So just Surak, Ouroboroid, and a Dream. This is what I got. And I can't attack here either, right? I need to leave this back as a blocker. My opponent's going to play a Kaito. So seemingly they're going to tap something down here, right? They're actually tapping down my Surak, which I think it would have been better to tap down my Ouroboroid. But look at what I drew. I drew the Snakeskin Veil. That's it. My opponent can see it's absolutely crazy ending there. I might not have won that game if I didn't get that Snakeskin Veil. Who knows? But really entertaining match here, except for the second game, which ended kind of quickly, right? All right, here's my opening hand for the first game of the 5th match. This looks pretty good. Gene Pollinator into Weaver, Paw Patch Recruit, Surak. I don't have a win condition, and I don't have my Badgermole Cub yet, but still a good hand. My opponent starts with their own Gene Pollinator, but they're actually, it's a Selesnya land, right? The Hushwood Verge. So they're already Selesnya colors. They play a Badgermole Cub. Look at that. So my opponent's off to a much better start than I am. We'll just have to see what happens, right? If I end up falling too far behind because of this. They play Airbend Ascension. Another new card from Avatar. Airbend Ascension is a really good card. That is a really good card. And unfortunately, I do not have the mana to play Surak and Leyline Weaver. So I'm thinking just playing the Surak and then just playing the Paw Patch, even though the Paw Patch will not be offspringed. It's at least, you know, a mana efficient play that I can do. My opponent's going to play Asuras, which is Peter Parker in paper. So they got a pretty wide board now. I do have Frenzied Baloth, which isn't that good, although I am debating attacking with it just to take, you know, they'll probably block with the spider, but I at least get it off the field and I get in for a little bit of damage. I'm also debating attacking with the Surak too, because I at least take something else out with it, but I decided not to. You know, I didn't want to trade away my Surak, so just trade with the spider, get in for 2 points of damage. My opponent warps in a Quantum Riddler. And they found a plane, so now their lands are online, right? Because they have both colors now. And that's it for them on that turn. But they are able to cast this Quantum Riddler, and I unfortunately just top decked the land, so this isn't looking that good, right? You know, this is just one of those examples where I got like nothing, right? And there's not much I can do about it. So my opponent's going to flash in an Appa, and they're going to airbend their Suras. And now the Airbend Ascension does have 4 counters on it. So at the end of their turn, they're able to exile something from their battlefield and then replay it. And look at this. I didn't know this. If you airbend a creature, like one of these spider creatures from Through the Omen Pass, the ones that are double-sided, when you replay it, you can choose the other side. I did not know that. I knew that works with like plotting. So if you can do the combo with Jace, right? Reawakens, where you plot it and then you can bring it back. And when you bring it back, you can choose the backside. But I didn't know that it also works with airbending. This is why I wanted to showcase this deck. This is really interesting. Now, Suras itself is not a very strong creature, even if you flip it to the backside. But this is really interesting. You know, look at the possibilities here. If you get to play a Vigo, the backside of Vigo, right? Or the backside of Kren, right? So there's a lot of potential here with this airbending to play the backside of those double-sided cards from the Through the Omen Pass for Spider-Man set. This is really, really interesting. My opponent's going to cast a Quantum Riddler. So this game is probably over, right? Even if I top deck an Ouroboroid or Behemoth or whatever, it's not going to make a difference, right? So. And now they can airbend again. Put the Quantum Riddler back. Airbend Extension is such a good card, y'all. That card is so freaking good. I'm really interested in putting it in a couple of my white decks, right? That Airbend Ascension is so good because it's whenever a creature enters. So whenever you got this multiple creatures entering, like imagine with Voice of Victory, dude, you can just bring stuff back every single turn to have multiple ETB triggers. It's just such a good card. So it's really not going well, right? I'm gonna play the game out just to see what happens, but it really doesn't feel like there's any way that I'm gonna win this game. Can you imagine if my opponent gets an Ouroboroid right now? bringing back the Quantum Riddler again. And I just top deck the land, so yeah, just not my game, right? And I drew 7 lands, which, you know, I only got 20 lands in the deck, right? But even so, look at this awesome board that my opponents put together, right? They just had really good draws and stuff. As Kellen joins up. And they exile an Aang. And they play a Doc Arlok. So at that point, I just wanted to, you know, I wanted to at least see what my opponent was going to do, but obviously the game was just over. So against this deck, I'm not too sure of what to do. Seemingly hard-hitting question could be good because they have a bunch of creatures and my creatures might be bigger, right? So my creatures can remove their creatures. And then I decided to put in the 2 Dragon Snipers for the flyers, right? The Appa and the Quantum Riddler and stuff like that, and the Aang. But I think there's also an argument to be made that I could have put in the Scrap Shooter to get rid of the Airbend Ascension and then also have another creature with reach to be able to block the flyers. But this is my opening hand for the second game. This looks much better. Gene Pollinator into Leyline Weaver and then potentially an Ouroboroid or a Pop Patch Fruit. And I drew a 3rd land, which is also good. You can get in for 1 with the Gene Pollinator. They warp in a Quantum Riddler. I drew a Bramble Familiar. I'm, of course, just going to run out this Ouroboroid. The Leyline Weaver attacks. Again, this is why this card is so freaking good. Now the Weaver can attack. That's an extra 3 damage that I can get in. And that's it. My opponent just goes... Hey, sometimes that happens, right? Sometimes if you don't have an answer for the Ouroboroid, then it's just over. So I did reconsider my sideboard here because I did think like, wait, should I put these Scrap Shooters in? I think there's an argument to be made that yes, that is the right thing to do, you know, take out the Tyvars, because going wide and buffing the entire board against a deck like this that seemingly plays a lot of creatures and has them enter the battlefield and can flip things and all this stuff, right? So that is what I'm thinking of doing. You know, I decided to just cut down on the Paw Patch recruits to make room for 2 of them. It doesn't seem like they would be targeting my stuff too much, but in retrospect, you know, they have the Airbending. They could target my creatures with that. But it doesn't really seem like they're running removal necessarily or anything like that. So this is my opening hand for the 3rd game. This is not good enough. I'm going to have to mulligan this. This opening hand is also not that good, but I do have 2 Badgermole Cubs. So maybe that's enough, right? But yeah, this hand is just not great. Neither hand was good, so just have to see what happens. Okay, start with a Gene Pollinator. And I just top deck the land, so unfortunately I might already be behind here. They play a Naya. Again, that's something that they can airbend and then play the backside of. So I'm going to start with this Badgermole Cub. You know, normally I would play the Leyline Weaver first, but because I have a backup Cub in my hand, it feels fine to just play this Cub. If it gets removed, then so be it. My opponent just passes, so they're seemingly holding something up here, but I didn't think it mattered too much. I am thinking of just getting rid of that Naya with my hard-hitting question because it's something that they can play the backside of, right? So I'm going to play my 2nd Cub, and then I can Earthbend another land here, and now I can tap it for 3. I'm going to start with a hard-hitting question to get rid of that Naya. And they were holding up an Aang, so they're going to airbend their Naya to save her. And I think that, you know, maybe I should have played the Paw Patch first. It probably wouldn't have made a difference, right? They probably still would have done it, but I feel like I could have waited because they were clearly holding something, right? So if they wanted to target one of my creatures, then they would have to do it before the Paw Patch comes down, right? And then I could decide what to do with the hard-hitting question. In this case, it probably wouldn't have made a difference. But I do think the better line of play would have been to play the Paw Patch first. So they play their own Badgermole Cub. And then they're going to play the backside of Naya. This is just really cool, man. Really cool what you can do with this airbending. So I drew a Gene Pollinator and I just have a Leyline Weaver. So I'm just top decking at this point, man. My opponent's got the better board, and I just have to see what happens. I need a Craterhoof. I need a Tyvar. I need an Ouroboroid. Honestly, Ouroboroid at this point might not even be enough, so... But the main reason why I wanted to show this match was my opponent's deck. This is a really cool deck. They're going to transform the Ang, which I actually think might have been a slight mistake because now the Ang can't attack. And I top decked a Tyvar. So, with them tapping that many creatures, I also think that them tapping that, I think that that turn that my opponent just had was a big mistake because they tapped down 3 of their creatures to do that, and the Ang wasn't able to attack. So if they didn't do that, they would have gotten in for 2 more damage, and then they would have had 3 untapped creatures. They also could have just not attacked with that Ang at all, and then have 4 blockers back. Because look at this, I have the mana to not only play Tyvar, but to activate the buff. So everything's going to get +3/+3. They only have 2 blockers. So this is seemingly going to be it right here, right? I can just tap one of these creatures, 4 mana, and I'll have 3 mana and then my 2 land. And this is going to be the game, right? They're not going to be able to block enough damage from this. Everything's going to get +3/+3. So I do think my opponent messed up a little bit on the last turn. They should not have activated that Ang. My opponent blocks, and now, of course, I'm going to activate Tyvar. Everything gets +3/+3, and that's just it. So I really think that my opponent flipping that Ang, my opponent made a mistake there. But my opponent's deck was really cool, right? That was such a cool deck and a cool synergy with the Airbending. All right, here's my opening hand for the first game of the 6th match, and this looks pretty good. It is unfortunate that I have only 1 land, but I have these creatures that generate mana. I have an Ouroboroid. I have a Craterhoof, right? So this could be pretty good. My opponent starts with a Cecil, and I did draw a 2nd land off the top. I think of just playing everything here that I can, the Weaver and the Pollinator. My opponent plays another Swamp, so this is seemingly mono black, and they didn't attack, so they're probably holding up removal. So because they were holding up removal, I was really apprehensive to play this Ouroboroid. And I do need to decide before combat. I need to decide before combat if I'm going to play this Ouroboroid or not, because if I do, then everything gets buffed, but if I play it after combat, then nothing gets buffed, including Ouroboroid itself. So I'm actually just debating activating the Soulstone Sanctuary. And then I'm also debating attacking, and I don't mind if my Sanctuary trades with Cecil, right? I still have enough mana to cast my Ouroboroid next turn. I'm also wondering if it's better to Earthbend here, because the boss Sing-Se can Earthbend one of my lands, and then it won't be able to attack into Cecil, but that is another creature that can get buffed with Ouroboroid when I do play it. I decided instead to just go for the Sanctuary, and I'll just attack with it. If my opponent blocks, then so be it. My opponent does block. The creatures trade. My opponent plays Tragic Trajectory on my Weaver. So now, unfortunately, I don't have the mana to cast the Ouroboroid. I do still think it was worth it there to attack and trade with the Cecil. Maybe it doesn't seem like it would have been worth it, but to me, it did. It did seem worth it to just get in for that, get that Cecil off the field, right? Take a more aggressive line here. There's no way necessarily around, like if my opponent has removal, they just have removal, right? So now drawing the Badgermole Cub actually makes this really interesting because I have enough mana to play Badgermole Cub and Ouroboroid. This card is just insane. I know I keep saying, like I get to Earthbend this land. I still have enough mana to play the Ouroboroid. It's going to buff my massive board. My opponent missed a land drop the last turn. So I'm just like way ahead right now. This is just absolutely crazy. And they just concede. I mean, I don't blame them. I mean, that is just absurd, right? It is just absurd what this card can do. So against mono black, I'm certainly going to leave in the protection spells here. And I want to put in another one, right? Another copy of Snakeskin Veil. And then I am thinking they could run Unholy Annex, so I might want like either Scrap Shooter or Hard Hitting Question here. The Frenzied Baloth, it doesn't really attack well into a Cecil, right? They just trade. And not only that, you know, look, if they just run other creatures, right, even like Unstoppable Slash or whatever, right? Frenzy Bailout doesn't trade well with that either. So it's looking like maybe just a Heritage Reclamation for the Unholy Annex. It's highly likely that they have one. I did also debate putting in the Scrap Shooter not only for Unholy Annex, but also for Deep Cavern Bats, right? But the Leyline Weaver is able to block Deep Cavern Bat. Here's my opening hand for the second game. It doesn't look that good. You know, 4 of my top end spells there, right? And then the next hand looked even worse. I didn't really have anything that I could play early on. So down to 5, unfortunately. But this hand is absolutely keepable. Land of Royal Elves into Badgermole Cub is what you want with this deck, right? And now I'm just debating what to keep. Do I keep the Tender Wild Guide? Do I keep the Bramble Familiar? Because the Bramble Familiar is a potential win condition, right? So I wasn't sure about putting that one away. But if I don't keep the Tender Wild Guide, then I might not really get to the 7 mana that easily, right? To be able to cast the Fetch Quest adventure, right? So this is a tough decision, right? I think actually maybe it is better to keep the Bramble Familiar in retrospect, just to have that win condition, but I obviously can go really wide here with the Elves, the Badgermole Cub, and the Tender Wild Guide. And speaking of going wide, I top decked the Tyvar. So this is what I want, right? This is exactly the kind of game that I want to be playing right now. My opponent plays a Demon Wall, so we'll see if they have an... And I drew a Craterhoof. Crazy. But now after that Craterhoof, I'm debating if I should Offspring the Wild Guide, right? Should I wait to play this Wild Guide? Should I Offspring it? I was actually thinking no. It might be better to just play it, because if I get one more land, then I can potentially put this Craterhoof down. But I decided instead to go a little bit... Look, they're not going to kill me in like the next turn or two, right? So I figured I can go a little bit slower. Let me go as wide as possible. I drew a Gene Pollinator, which I can cast alongside the Offspring Tender Wild Guide. So this is what I want, right? To go really, really wide here and see if I can get in for tons of damage. So Offspring the Wild Guide. No removal on my opponent's side. And play the Gene Pollinator. So because they didn't have any removal there, I do feel like I can be a little bit patient. If they top deck a removal spell, it's not even that bad, you know, for my Cub. So it's not removal. It is an intimidation tactic. So they're going to take my Craterhoof away. It might not really matter though, right? The Tyvar might be enough to get the job done here. And look at this. I top decked the Craterhoof anyway. So that's it, man. I'm really debating just running this out. I mean, so I don't want to like... It doesn't seem like I'm going to win the game, though, on this turn. See, look, I'm checking the math, right? I'm not going to win the game on this turn if I play Craterhoof. They have too much toughness back to block, and not only that, they're going to block something with Cecil, and that thing will die. It could be Craterhoof, it could be Badgermole Cub, right? So I am debating just playing the Tyvar. If they have removal for my Cub, though, then I might not win the game, right? That's the tough thing that I'm wrestling with here, is that if I wait a turn, I will definitely win on the next game. On the next turn, I mean. But they could also remove my Cub, and then I might not be able to win. So I'm going through all the mana here. I'm checking everything. And it really feels like I should just play this Tyvar instead. So we have to see. If they top deck removal, they top deck removal. It's not removal, but it is a Bloodletter of Aklazotz. So that is another blocker. And it also has 4 toughness, so I'm still thinking this Craterhoof might not be enough. Now everything's gonna get +8/+8 and trample, right? But I have to tap a lot of my creatures to do it. So with me top decking a Paw Patch Recruits, it felt like I should go even wider, because then it's just +10/+10 or whatever, and the Paw Patches can attack, right? Both of them. That will absolutely seal the deal. But again, I run the risk of my opponent top decking a removal spell. So this is a really fine line, but it just doesn't feel like playing this Craterhoof and doing a big swing. Yes, it will clear my opponent's board, but I'm probably going to lose my Badgermole Cub, right? Because they'll probably block it with Cecil. It just does... It feels like I need to end this in a single turn, and the only answer that they can get is if they get removal for my Cub. They did top deck removal. They top deck an Archmage's Charm, but they're targeting Tyvar. They're targeting the wrong creature. And, you know, look, they don't know that I have Craterhoof in my hand, but I have to tap 4 of my, if they get rid of the Badgermole Cub, right? I have to tap 4 of my creatures and my land to activate the Tyvar. That's not going to be enough. It's not going to be enough to kill them. They needed to target my Cub there. They had it. They had the answer. And you could argue that I was playing too patient, that I should have played the Craterhoof on my previous turn, which I think is fair. I think that is a fair thing to say. You know, now, and I don't think that, so especially with me top decking an Ouroboroid, right? It's like, well, I might as well just go for it, right? Because if whatever they remove, I'm just going to play an Ouroboroid after anyway, right? So, but really, huge mistake on my opponent's part. They really, really should have targeted my Cub. So I'm going to tap the Gene Pollinator and the Cub. I didn't really need, I was doing that because I figured I'm not going to attack with the Cub, right? But I didn't really need to do that because this taps 2 of my creatures. So it probably would have been better to just tap the 2 Wild Guides instead, right? The Wild Guides and the Elves and the land. I was also thinking that, look, if I don't win on this turn, I wasn't really doing the math, right? So I was like, if I don't win on this turn and they block the Cub, then I'm going to lose the Cub, right? So, but I didn't need to worry about that, right? I just play this Craterhoof and attack with it, and then they just concede anyway. So, but really, my opponent needed to target my Cub there. I would have been able to swing with Tyvar, but it wouldn't have won me the game. So I hope you all enjoyed those matches featuring mono green. This deck is a lot of fun, and it is just absolutely nuts, the game-winning turns that you can have. I'm sure you're all curious how the deck did, and here is the win-loss record. It's not quite as high as you might expect, but I will say that there's actually one more win that for whatever reason Untapped just didn't track. So it's actually 9-3. I know there's no way that I can really prove that, but I assure you I am not making that up. There is one more win in there that for some reason Untapped just didn't track. It's still a really good win rate, right? That's kind of crazy, but it's not quite as high as you might expect. And that actually leads me to my next point, which is that even though I have tried pretty diligently here to make this deck very consistent and to have multiple win conditions and ways to interact with the meta, or at least somehow fit into the meta between Surak and Keen Eye Curator and stuff like that, it still does feel inconsistent, unfortunately. It's not necessarily the kind of thing where it's like, oh, if I can't play Craterhoof, then I lose the game. That's not really what I mean. It's just that there really are some of these matches where I'm just getting lands, or I'm just getting my smaller creatures, or I just got my one big creature, but then it got removed and I didn't get another one. You know what I mean? And that inconsistency did cost me a few games, but also in some of those matches that you saw, I did get a little bit lucky with my top decks, right? And you kind of wonder, would I have won those games if I didn't get lucky? I don't know, right? So despite my effort with the brewing here, I'm not sure if this really is the final version of this deck, at least for best of 3, right? For best of 1, it will take on a much different look, but I'm not sure if this is the final version for best of 3. It feels like maybe you can cut a paw patch for something else, but I'm not sure what it is. I'm tempted to say another copy of Vivian. I'm also tempted to say that maybe you take out the 2 copies of Vivian. Well, if you take this out and take out a copy of Vivian, then you put in 2 copies of Commune with Beavers. Just any way that this deck can get just a little bit more consistent. You know, the Surak is really, really good. This is very important for best of 3, I think, but I don't think you want to run 4 copies because he's legendary. So I'm not too sure. I mean, maybe you could cut the 2 hard-hitting questions, you keep the Vivian in, and then you put in the 2 copies of Commune with Beavers in here instead of this. That's a possibility. And then you make room for the 2 hard-hitting questions on the sideboard. You can cut a Frenzy Baloth. You can cut a Dragon Sniper. Maybe it's not necessary to have all 3. But in spite of the inconsistency as it is right now for me, I think this deck is just very close. It's very close. It feels like it's right on the cusp of like tier 1. You know, this feels like a tier 2 deck with the potential for tier 1 with the crazy turns that you can have. But it's not always there, right? Sometimes the deck does just fall flat. But maybe that's just the way it is. You know, maybe despite how crazy Badgermole Cub is, maybe the mono green build is just not quite tier 1. It will not actually get there because of the inconsistency. Then again, maybe not. Try it out yourself. Switch out a few of these cards for something else. See what happens and see if it makes the deck even better. I do want to go back to what I said in the beginning of the video, which is that Badgermole Cub is a mistake. Again, I'm sorry to be negative, but look, I don't want to just dance around and beat around the bush and pretend like this is a good thing, because I don't think it is. I don't think it's a good thing that Wizards keeps printing these crazy powerful cards. I don't think it's healthy for Standard. I think it puts too much pressure on other decks to kind of rise up and meet that overpowered card. I don't think Badgermole Cub is quite as bad as Core Steel Cutter, or quite as bad as Vivi, but it's close. You know, this is a really powerful card. And I also think that there are just a lot of really powerful cards in this set. And I'm not sure that having really powerful set after really powerful set, I'm not sure how healthy and sustainable that really is, right? So just taking a step back away from all the excitement of the Craterhoofs and the Ouroboroids and the Badgermole Cub, just taking a step back to just breathe and look at what's going on. I'm not sure I feel that good about the direction that Standard is heading in for the future, especially going into next year. Because if you look at this year, you look at what we had to deal with, not all of it was that great, right? What we had to go through this year. So I just hope that this isn't a sign that every single set there's just going to be some busted card and another busted card and another busted card. And then Standard just ends up not being that fun to play anymore. You know what I mean? That wraps this one up. Again, it was really exciting to go back to an archetype that has been a part of pretty much almost all of my Magic career, right? There have been so many periods when I played Magic in which I made a mono green deck, and it just felt great to go back to this. You know, I do like this color. I do like these kind of decks that just play really big creatures or just go really big over the top. If you enjoyed, then drop me a like to beat the YouTube algorithm and leave me some feedback in the comments. What do you think about this deck? Do you have any suggestions as to how you can make it some more consistent? What do you think about Badgermole Cub? What do you think about Standard? What do you think about Avatar? You know, what do you think about the Avatar cards in general? Also, there have been a lot of you joining my Discord, which I think is really cool. We've got a nice small community there. So if you're looking for like-minded people to discuss Magic with, then consider joining the server. I'll link it in the description. And lastly, if you are a fan of this kind of Magic the Gathering content that gets deep into deck building, play patterns, and other aspects of the game, then subscribe to the channel to see more. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.